All right, I suppose that we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you guys for attending our fourth soil health webinar. My name is Angel with Central and Eastern Klickitat Conservation Districts. And today we're going to be talking about carbonomics, so the economy of our soil. And I'm going to go ahead and briefly go over kind of what we do here at the Conservation District for those of you who are unfamiliar. So we work with local private landowners to implement conservation practices to improve and conserve natural resources. So natural resources such as water quality and quantity, soil productivity, livestock health, air quality, plant health and vigor, as well as wildlife habitat. And some typical projects that we do include riparian restoration. We do fuels reduction for forest health, transitioning to alternate farming practices, livestock waste management, and more. So if any of you are interested in any technical advice or assistance related to natural resources on your property, I do have our contact information there on the right-hand side of the screen, as well as my email address. And I will be sending out a follow-up email with my contact information, as well as the contact information for our presenters today. And a couple of things here. So there will be a post-webinar survey. If you could please fill that out, that would be very much appreciated. If you have questions during the webinar, there's a little Q&A button there at the bottom. You can click that and type your questions in there, and the presenters will address those as they see fit, possibly at the end of their presentations. And thank you so much to our NRCS partners, both locally and nationally. We thank you so much for partnering with us and sharing your wealth of knowledge. So I am going to go ahead and stop sharing here and introduce our presenters today. So we have Joe Williams and Marlon Winger with us today. They are going to be co-presenting the same presentation on carbonomics. Our first presenter is Joe Williams. So Joe Williams has been with NRCS for 25 years, having worked in 4 Western states as an agronomist, plant material center manager, district conservationist, soil conservationist, assistant state conservationist for field operations, and currently works as a soil health specialist with the Soil Health Division. Joe has served several details as acting state resource conservationist of Nevada and state agronomist for California. Outside of NRCS, Joe has served as the chair of the California Certified Crop Advisor Board of Directors, president of the California Nevada chapter of the Soil and Water Conservation Society, and president of the Oregon chapter of the Soil and Water Conservation Society. Prior to working for NRCS, Joe was a pest control advisor / sales representative, specializing in turf and ornamental crops. Joe received his Bachelor of Science in Agronomy from California State Polytechnic University, Pomona. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Marlon right now as well. So Marlon earned his bachelor's and master's degrees at Utah State University in plant science. He grew up on a family-owned dairy farm in Dayton, Idaho, where he found his passion for life, agriculture. Marlon worked as a county agricultural agent for Utah State University Extension Service for 9 years in Price, Utah. He has been working for the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, for about 12 years as an area agronomist in northern Utah and state agronomist in Idaho. Marlon currently works as the regional soil health specialist for Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. Marlon and his family live on a ranchette in Casper, Wyoming, where the family raises pasture, sheep, hogs, a few calves, and a large garden. All right, I'll go ahead and let you guys take it away. So Joe, it is all yours.
Great, thank you, Angel. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so hopefully everyone can see the screen, and the title, like Angel had mentioned, is Carbonomics. And can you guys see the screen here?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. Well, again, thanks for the introduction, Angel, and really glad that everyone can join us and participate with us. Again, we're going to kind of talk today. We're calling it Carbonomics, and it's the wonderful economy of the soil. And this is actually a presentation that we're taking and getting out to you guys. But Keith Burns with Green Cover Seed, this is kind of his presentation, and he's been gracious enough to let us present it to you as well too. And so, again, this carbonomics is really kind of a new way to look at how the soil can tie in with economics. And to be honest with you, before I had seen Keith's presentation, I honestly hadn't given that a thought to the correlation here. But as he's gone through this presentation, and we're going to give that to you right now, there is a huge, strong correlation, and so it really is kind of looking at the soil and all the soil biological processes and how it drives things and how that actually can really be tied in with the economy and the economics of the drivers of this whole all these different systems. And so want to kind of talk real briefly again, like Angela mentioned, I'm an agronomist, and in terms of economics, I know enough to be slightly dangerous, which is really not much of anything. But and again, I'm sure a lot of you have a good background in economics, but again, how it ties in with a soil, this is kind of a newer dynamic that we're kind of looking at. Um, so what we want to kind of talk about is to again just kind of give a brief definition of economics, which is basically kind of the study of how society chooses to allocate its scarce resources to the production of goods and services in order to satisfy unlimited wants. Okay, and so that's just kind of a term or a definition that's been accepted by a number of economists. And so, how does that work, and how does this compare to again the soil and how it functions, and the different organisms that are associated with a healthy ecosystem, soil ecosystem, how that actually kind of drives the economy, as it were, below ground, and it's going to compensate for the above ground part of that too. And so what we're going to do between my portion and Marlon's portion is we're going to kind of compare the soil to a large country in regards to economic viability, such as us in the United States. So that's kind of what we're talking about. So want to kind of start off with this slide. Thought it was kind of funny in the sense that it's relax. My broker says the economy will bounce back. This is if economy is down, um, it's you got to look at the fact that, okay, hey, who is your broker, who you're working with, are they going to be in the same situation, are they going to understand how the economy is working, and just everything that's associated with it, and the driver of that. So anyway, just kind of start off in there. But let's talk real briefly about some of the 7 keys to a healthy economy. And this again is just to an economy and based. Let's base it on the U.S. economy, which obviously is really strong. But with those keys to a healthy economy, we've got supply, and with the supply, we've got those that produce, the durable goods and also in services, and they're the sellers too, right? So you've got that whole supply chain, and that, as we all know and are experienced at this point in time, how disruptions to that supply chain can really affect the end users and all the way down the line, right? So then you've also got the demand, which is the consumers and the buyers, and a lot of this is built on the tastes and preferences of the buyers, in terms of that demand, what's going to be driving that. Obviously, income is going to be important. What are you going to be able to afford? What are those individuals going to be able to afford to buy and consume that way? The expectations of those buyers too on the demand side too. Are they going to be able to get that service in a reasonable time frame? Are they going to be getting a good quality on that? Um, and with this, economists kind of talk about the problem of scarcity. Okay, and what that is, the scarcity is it's the condition in which human wants are forever greater than the available supply of time, goods, and resources. And although life is less grueling here in the U.S., thankfully, the problem of scarcity still exists because individuals and countries never have as much of all the goods and services they would like to have, right? And me for one I'm a prime example of that too. I'm always, wanting more, right? And so how am I going to get that? What are the services that are going to be provided? How am I going to pay for that? What kind of budget am I looking at? But with a healthy economy, obviously you have currency. You need that money, which includes coins and paper. And now we've got Bitcoin. So how does this society and economy function with currency? Capital is also part of a key to healthy economy. And so we're talking about capital here is the physical plants, the machinery, equipment used to produce other goods and services, right? And then we've got energy and resources that we need in order to drive that capital. And based on the supply and demand, needing those resources to actually produce those different products to get out to the public. We need good infrastructure. And with that infrastructure, once the supply chain is in place, once that demand from the consumers are there, they want these products, they want these services. You need a good infrastructure to get that service, and all those products distributed throughout the country. And you need that infrastructure in place, right? So you guys are very aware of what's going on again with that supply chain that's happening here now as well too. The infrastructure is there, but it's actually getting those goods and services to the end producer, the end consumer. So you need a really healthy infrastructure to get that going. Also need a good defense and protection system for the country, right? So there's always going to be other countries and individuals that are going to want to take advantage of the good keys to this healthy economy, right? So you need a good strong defense, you need good protection in there to make sure that all these things work in a good way. So let's kind of break these down a little bit more in terms of, again, what are we talking about in terms of the supply? And so here in this context, we're talking about producers and sellers. And so, strong economies are very productive, right? And again, you guys know this really well. We've got, there's a big group of people and companies that are producing, the goods and services that we want. And so, everyone's involved in the system. Okay, we've got a lot of workers out there. We've got a lot that are producing things so that are actually have goods that are going to be able to be sold. And so we've got all this. The system is working well. And a high percentage, like it says here, of all entities involved in the economy are producing something. So when you just think about a certain product, I just think of an automobile as an example of this. That supply of all those different parts and the number of people that it takes to put that vehicle together, getting it shipped out to the various lots, and then the consumer is able to buy it at that point in time. But just think of all those components that are associated with a car, from start to finish, and how that's going. But and all the companies that are involved that are manufacturing all those smaller big parts to that vehicle. So again, all these entities are involved, and so the economy is producing something because they're all tied in with that. And with that, again, with the example of a vehicle, the diversity is very important. Again, you're going to have some manufacturers are going to be producing the engine. You're going to have other manufacturers going to be that are going to be doing the electrical components, the seats, the interior, radios, all these different and pieces of that vehicle are going to be needed for that end final product, right? So that diversity is very important, and so you're going to have multiple sources of that kind of supply chain coming in. So that's where it's really important to have all that in there. So the flip side, again, we've got the demand, which is the consumers and the buyers. And so, with a strong economy, having the good suppliers, strong economies also have high demand for the products too. And that demand is consistent and constant too, right? So the economies are strongest when the majority are both suppliers, which are the producers, and the consumers are as well are there too. So again, there's that balance. We're getting the supply chains, we're getting the products that are made, and we have that demand from the consumers, and that's driving it all. So these forces of supply and demand determine the returns, to factors. For example, you tie into wages and the quantity of labor supplied. And they're highly connected. They're absolutely highly connected, right? So having two strong two strong sides of that. Both the supply and the demand side are really important. And again, we tie in the diversity is very important as well too. So again, we got this, a number of people that are buying different goods and services. We have a number of companies that are producing those products, and we've got the infrastructure, we got the transportation all tied in there as well too. So it's all clicking at that point in time. So we do have a good, supply that can be met, as well as the demand to actually drive that supply. We also obviously have the currency, right? And so currency basically allows for quick, efficient, fair transaction or exchanges between the producer and the consumers. And again, currency, as we well know, are kind of for kind of some of the more small ticket items, as an example. But it needs to be universally desired and accepted. And that's we go to a different store, in one part of the country to the other, but we all take, they all take the currency of America, right, for the United States. Um, so that's important to have that currency and to have that strong currency that's is being able to be utilized. And there also has to be needs to have different forms and flow, to be able to have it move in different ways. And so again, we've got newer transactions and new type of electronic currencies coming into place as well now too, that we're working with. But again, there's different forms, but they still have to move freely from one, and from the consumer to the seller easily. There's also capital, like we talked about. Capital again is kind of the physical plants, all the machinery, the equipment used to produce other goods. That's kind of capital. And then, the accumulated, stored, or saved currency, as depicted here too. That's also capital too. And you need capital for growth and stability. And I'm sure a lot of you folks that are out there talking or with us right now, producers, or just you have a business in general, you need that capital, right? And you need to have some of that saved. You need to have some of that for kind of a rainy day type of fund, right? And so that's kind of what you're looking for. You're really kind of building up that capital. And so we're going to talk about how that's the same with soils as well too. So the other big part of that too is of course energy and resources. And so energy drives a system, but it's expensive, as we well know, right? Energy costs are continuously going up. Price of gas, as an example, is oil is really going up quite a bit right now too, right? So, but energy, we need that energy because it drives the system. It drives those manufacturing plants. It drives, the truck to get it from point A to point B. Same with the rail lines, just any ships, those kind of things. We need energy to get that system going. But then we're also talking about resources, and the resources provide a base for growth and expansion. And so, kind of think about how much water is used or needed from some of these processing plants to get a product done. We're also talking coal, petroleum, natural gas, minerals for your computer, for your laptops, for your cell phones, those kind of things. Those are just resources that are going to be utilized and needed for a good, healthy, functioning economy, right? So again, resources provide a base for that growth and expansion. If we don't have those resources, it's going to really slow growth and expansion, and or else we're going to need to get those resources from some other place. Man, that's going to cost a lot more money. Again, talking about infrastructure, this is obviously really key. So if you have some goods and services, at point A, but you're not able to get them to, on the demand side to the consumer on point B, that's not good. It's obviously going to, have effect on the economy, have a big effect on, the overall, wages and everything else that are associated with that supply chain. So infrastructure and good infrastructure, having that in place is very important. Thankfully, here in the U.S., we've got some aging infrastructure, but at the same time, we do have a really good system set up, between rail lines, freeways, highways, all throughout the United States, to get those goods from one place to the other. Port systems, those kind of infrastructural things that we have for this country to get those good services across the states and across the country is there. So it allows economies to grow beyond just the subsistence and where it's located. Part of the infrastructure also, we're talking about communication too, right? Of being able to, be able to place an order from one side of the country to the other, and utilizing that infrastructure to get that product from one side of the country to the consumer on the other side. And again, the transportation, both having the mix of and the diversity of the transportation. Again, we got rail lines, we got freeway systems, we've got boats, we've got trucks, those kind of things. So we just have a really good infrastructure, and all that is needed to keep the economy stable and growing. So we talked again about defense and protection, and strong economies will always be under attack by those who want to consume without producing. It's just the way it is, unfortunately. But that's just how it kind of works in terms of strong economy. That we have a lot of good stuff, and there's always going to be, again, other countries, individuals that want to have what we have. So, but with that, it requires, as everyone knows, requires an investment of capital. It doesn't come free. The defense, we need to pay into that. We need to have that structure, the armed forces, an example here, in place. And so that all takes capital to pay for that, to actually maintain that defense and maintain that protection. So again, there's an investment there. So again, so the seven keys to a healthy economy, again, like we're talking about: supply, demand, currency, capital, energy and resources, that infrastructure, and again, that defense and protection. So how does that relate to soil? Okay. And so when you kind of think about it, and we'll kind of go through these, is the fact that, you know, soil also needs supply. We're going to talk about producers, we're going to talk about those sellers. Also, there's demand there, and the demand side is the consumers, and who are those buyers. There is a currency, in the soil system and the soil ecosystem, and when that's mainly it's carbon. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. We also have capital. We also have the energy and resources that are needed by, just think of the plants. That's kind of what's driving this system, right? So again, what's going to be needed and what's going to be extended from that energy and resource perspective. Infrastructure, how are we going to get, how do plants extract things from the soil? What does the soil provide? How does that mechanism, get from point A to point B? How does that work? So there is an infrastructure in there. There's also defense and protection. As we all know, plants are constantly under attack, be it from insects, nematodes in the soil, fungi. There's just a number of plant pathogens. There's a lot of different things out there that, in this case, healthy soil is going to help provide defense and protection. But again, that's something that, when you relate it to the healthy economy, that's something that soils provide as well too. And again, tying it into the soil to defense and protection. So does everyone know what this is? I hope so. This is actually obviously the sun. And so boiling that down to the soil and soil ecosystem, the sun is what really kind of drives this economy, really helps facilitate that. As we all know, life on Earth without the sun and sunlight would be non-existent, right? And so, have you ever just kind of stopped and thought about that in an economic standpoint? And so that's what we're going to kind of chat about here. But again, just showing how, the sun really drives a lot of the functionality of what's going on in the soil and the soil ecosystem, utilizing that energy that's derived from the sun by plants. And so here's kind of the soil economy. And so again, just kind of showing that, the plants, by utilizing sunlight, with photosynthesis, we'll talk about that here in a second, is able to utilize that and grow in the soil. But with that, the plants, by taking up the sunlight, through the process of photosynthesis, the root exudates that are going out into the soil that are actually helping to drive, we're not putting carbon into the soil, but it's starting to drive that biology in that soil with the animals. Okay. And so there's this link here, as you can see on this diagram, that soil economy it's all tied together: the plants, the soil, and the animals in the system. These are all keys to keep the healthy soil. And in particular, on the right hand part of that slide, a lot of the really small critters that are really driving this. So we're talking the bacteria, we're talking the fungi, nematodes. Some of the pictures there are some mites, earthworms, as you all well know, colembula. So there's just a number of just diverse group of animals in the soil that are helping to drive this whole economy. So how does this all work? As you guys have all seen this before, it's a fairly simple um, equation, but this is basically photosynthesis, right? And so this is basically plants producing carbon. So they will take up carbon dioxide, as we all know, have some water with that. We take the sun's energy, and through chloroplast and chlorophyll, we're going to create the plant will create the C6H12O6, which glucose, that's sugars, and oxygen. They're going to give off oxygen, right? So this is photosynthesis at its finest, and so we need to be able to tie all this in. And so the fact that the plants are the only thing early organisms that can do this. And so this really is the foundation of life, right? It really starts, and this is what really kind of again starts driving that economy. And so, but with that, in terms of the economic aspects of things, plants now, through the sugars and through oxygen, they have something to sell. I mean, so now this is the supply chain. They are now producers and sellers in this whole system. But again, as you can see in this equation, we're going to keep talking about it, especially here in a few more minutes. But carbon is a key component of here. Carbon is, what plants are producing, and that's what's really going to be kind of the economy side of things in terms of the currency. So soil on the supply side, as you guys all well know, I know we have some producers out there. We also have folks that are gardening, and just that at times you need to add certain elements into the soil in fertilizers, right? And some of the chart up there, you see nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. Those are some really big ones, right? That you know are needed by plants in order to reproduce, to have functioning in the cells, to be able to grow healthy. And so the soil does provide those nutrients and minerals. And also we're talking about oxygen and helium, nitrogen, and carbon are in the air, of course, but in terms of the minerals, like on that right hand side diagram there, they're in the soil. Okay. But most of those minerals are not, and those elements are not readily taken up just directly by the plants. So we'll talk about that. It needs biology to get that going. But the soil will provide that, generally speaking. Soil also is going to provide habitat for roots and biology, as we well know. With and we'll talk a little bit more about the biology. But again, soil at its basic is there to hold that plant in the soil. That root system is going to be growing out into the soil. It's going to anchor it. You need the soil, obviously, to do that, right? But again, really want to tie in the biology aspects of that too, because the soil ecosystem is, the ground beneath our feet is just incredibly diverse. The number of organisms, I'm sure a lot of you have heard the figures, but we're talking billions of organisms, with under our feet, right? And within a gram of soil, I mean, there's just millions and millions of organisms in there. So it really is a unique ecosystem below our feet as we're standing there. Also, soil key is providing water storage, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that too. And then you guys all know how important that is you know, to have water storage and water availability, particularly for crops. So how does that work? How does the biology drive that? So again, soil biota is the producing part of this supply chain. And so what they're doing is they're producing nutrients, as they're eating soil organic matter, as they're eating other animals, so as they're eating fungi, bacteria in the soil ecosystem. They're giving off, through excretions, through dying, those kind of things. They're actually producing nutrients. They're going to be able to be utilized by plants. So they're driving a lot of this nutrient cycling as well too. And so by doing that, promoting that nutrient cycling, it's making those nutrients more available to plants. So the soil biota in the system is just incredibly important to help drive and supply, a lot of these products that are needed by plants and ultimately by us. Soil biota also provide defense and protection. And just like, when you bring it to a natural type of a system, and thinking about it in that way, nature abhors a vacuum, right? I'm sure we've all heard that same phrase before. And so it's exactly true with soil biota. And so, if we promote a good healthy soil, we have all these different organisms in there. They've got their niche, they've got their place in the soil, They're feeding, they're producing, reproducing, they're just driving these nutrient cycles. It's going to reduce the potential, or of additional, disease organisms in the system. A lot of times the other organisms are actually eating some of those disease organisms. So again, it's just like us. If we have a healthy body, we're able to fight off and ward off, diseases, and those kind of things too. So, again, by having a healthy soil biota and diverse group of different organisms in that system, we're going to be able to build that defense and protection. So that's the supply side of things. So on the demand side of things, what we're talking about, obviously, again, is consumers and the buyers. So plants, that's going to be one of the consumers on here, right? They need the nutrients and they need the water. And so, the demand is there. They need that for basic functions to grow. Yeah, they're producing photosynthates, they're utilizing the sun's energy, and they're pumping those photosynthates down into the root system. Soil organisms are utilizing those photosynthates and those sugars, amino acids, everything else in that system to help drive that. But at the same time, those plants need nutrients and water to grow. So they're kind of the demand side of things. And they need services like I just talked about, protection and support from the soil in order to be able to maintain, proper function in the system on there. So again, soil needs carbon, and that's the carbon is the driving is the epitome of life, right? We need carbon to actually live and function. And the soil, again, needs those services of protection as an example. The soil biota in turn, through the soil needs food and the habitat. Again, just like roots need the soil to actually anchor and hold them into place. The soil biota need that food and that habitat that the soil provides to maintain themselves. So, kind of real briefly talking about, the producers again, the consumers, in a strong human economy, one of the leading indicators is a low unemployment rate, where most people are both consumers and producers and are actively engaged in making a contribution to the system. Okay. Everybody's involved, either producing or buying. Generally, everyone is contributing. Is what we're kind of talking about here. So the same kind of had to be said for the soil too. The soil economy is strongest when plants, the soil, and animals are all producing and consuming. There's that harmony in place there. And again, diversity is very important. It's key. Think about all the jobs and skills that are needed to produce products and sell and consume. Again, just think of a new car as an example. Just think of all those different roles and responsibilities that all the different people that are actually building those parts, that are actually putting all those parts together, that are actually getting those cars to the lot. There's just all these just different roles and responsibilities and skills that are needed to get that done. And again, it all ties into the diversity is very important on there. So the next thing we're talking about kind of is kind of quote unquote agricultural welfare. And so this is kind of what we're talking about in terms of, when we externally provide the plant with everything that it needs from the outside. And with that, we kind of weaken the economy, right? And so what we're talking about there is, we're bringing in additional fertilizers, right? We're utilizing, inorganic forms of those type of fertilizers, through fertilizer inputs and crop protection inputs too. Hitting with herbicides, hitting with insecticides, fungicides to fight off and ward off and help the plant, maintain some health right there too. But basically, externally, we're providing crop plants with inputs, and the role that biology should perform isn't there, right? So that's kind of what we're talking about here. And so we therefore kind of have a step in and fill that role with bringing in external, sources to actually help maintain that crop production, as an example here. So Abraham Lincoln, quote that is in here: "You cannot help men permanently by doing for them what they could and should do for themselves." And so, what he's basically talking about here in this is that, we're not saying that shouldn't help people, shouldn't help, the crops as an example by some of these inputs. But again, there's a certain point where, you can try and reduce as much as possible. We're not talking, again, not totally taking out all the inputs, but we're going to try and reduce them as much as possible. And so this is where you can question in regards to your crop production or your garden, whatever the case may be. How do all these inputs that you may be putting in there, how are they affecting the soil biology? How are they affecting the soil? And again, that's kind of what we really want to chat about and talk about today is again, really kind of thinking of again, that soil biology and how these external inputs, are affecting that. And could soil and the soil biota that are in the system actually so it serve to function in those instead of actually needing those inputs. So we need to allow the system to work the way it was created to work, really. All right. So this is kind of how in nature that's kind of how it works. So we're just trying to talk about how, again, if we're able to utilize, biology, that's kind of a key role. And so we want to kind of look at a paradigm of looking at utilizing soil biology to help us, for reducing inputs, but really to kind of utilize just think of the economy of that. Let's put these let's put these to work, right? So currency again, it's important because it allows goods and services to be exchanged more efficiently too, as we're going down this list. So, why money was invented is pretty good. I like this cartoon. Sorry, I've got nothing smaller to offer other than other than a cow, right? So, again, this is kind of what we're talking about. But, again, carbon is the currency for our system and for soil economics. And so again, photosynthesis is free, but it's the plant needs it to turn it into utilize photosynthesis to turn it into something valuable. And so, again, with photosynthesis as an example, that's kind of the currency, and the root exudates are really what's kind of driving that as part of this currency. And up to 50% of the photosynthates that the plant will make and produce can be exuded in the soil through the roots. And so, again, utilize this currency by other soil organisms. And so, again, that's kind of where that trade comes in. Plants are providing a currency, and the microbes and the soil biota are utilizing that currency and taking that currency to help make more nutrients available to the plants. They're actually providing protection and those kind of things too. So that's where that currency ties in. But again, the plant economy, carbon is the currency there, right? And so as you can see in this example and this equation again, carbon is a big part of this whole thing. And so that's what the driving force of this. So again, currency, the carbon is important because it allows goods and services to be exchanged more efficiently. So again, what we're talking about there is those photosynthetes that are utilized by or produced by the plant that are exuded through the root system and are utilized by those soil organisms. And so there's that currency, and that's why it's important because then that's going to start driving that healthy system, and we're bringing in the diversity of organisms to actually utilize that. So carbon currency, as you can see here, carbon is essential to all life. We're 19% carbon, by makeup. That's us. Carbon can form over 10 million chemical compounds, which is pretty amazing to me. But again, the fact that carbon is that base. Carbon is the most important but most overlooked of all plant nutrients. How often are we talking about, and again, my background is an agronomist, and I'm sure you guys as well too. Hey, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. That's that NPK. That's really what start talking about soil tests. You start talking about going to the fertilizer. You go to the feed stores. Pick up some small stuff. It's all based on NPK. But if you ever take a step back and really think about it, carbon is the most important part of the plant nutrients, but it's probably the most. It's the one that's most overlooked. Carbon is the main food source for soil biology, like I've mentioned before too. So it's really important to have that in there. Carbon can be collected through photosynthesis. It can be spent, again, traded through the root exodus to soil organisms. It can be saved in soil organic matter, and it is universally desired by all members of the economy. And again, we're talking the soil economy at this point in time, right? But it's got all these different factors to it, but it's all based upon carbon. Carbon has different states. It can go from gas to liquid to a solid, and these transformations are pretty easy to go by. So again, just reiterating the fact that carbon, as we're talking about here, is the currency. And as we're showing here, that has different states. So we've got it as gas, but then it can go into liquid, in plants in the soil. So again, through those root exudates, and it's solid, in terms of those living organisms are making up, and the dead organisms making up that organic matter. So again, that's that carbon currency and how that functions all the way through the cycle. Um, just real briefly, I want to talk about soil organic matter. Again, soil organic matter is complex, and it's a varied mixture of organic substances, hence carbon. And all organic substances, by definition, contain the element carbon. And on an average, just an example, carbon can comprise about half of the mass of soil organic matter. And so that's why it's so important. Again, that's what we're talking about here. But capital, again, accumulated and stored and saved. We need the growth and stability, right? So we can have excess currently, and we can turn that savings into capital. But and so again, that's long-term investments, which is needed to build for the future. So with current inputs, though, and kind of talking about kind of some more of the modern agricultural inputs we're talking about, we can associate that in farming, and that's kind of more living paycheck to paycheck, right? So, if we're continuously adding additional fertilizers, additional inputs that way, instead of utilizing soil and the soil biology that's already there. We're basically kind of almost living paycheck to paycheck. And so a lot of times it's needed. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, again, we're not with that system. We're not necessarily building a capital. And so that's what we're talking about here. Getting that soil organic matter built up into the soil, we're going to be able to do that. So, kind of talking again about soil carbon capital, again, you can kind of see that the base is that soil organic matter and organic matter and humus. And so you can see all the different functions of soil organic matter. Biologically, it's a source of energy, reservoir of nutrients, and there's that soil and plant systems resilience with soil organic matter in place. Chemical, it's going to create additional, more cation exchange capacity. It's going to, soil pH going to kind of help buffer that. The soil organic matter is going to help bind soil minerals in there so that a lot of them are not going to be leached out or blown away. And then physical, we're talking about, structural stability in the soil, water retention, thermal properties, and thermal properties mainly just, maintaining a nice, stable temperature in the soil there. So again, all this is needed for growth and stability, in the soil. So as a comparison, we're talking about capital rich economies. Again, they're productive, stable, resilient, and efficient. Conversely, high organic matter soils, looking at that, they're productive, stable, resilient, and efficient. So capital savings is, it can't be increased without an excess of cash income, right? Back on the economy side of things. Um, you need that capital to be able to build upon that. So organic matter can't be increased with an excess of carbon currency. Okay. So, and then soil carbon can't be increased in most rotations that we currently have in a lot of our systems that we have, in the state and throughout the country right now without the use of cover crops. And that's kind of one of the examples of that we're talking about is, you don't want to leave the soil bare. That's some of the principles, one of the principles that we talk about. But with that, utilizing cover crops as an example, you're able to build that soil carbon, hence capital. You're building that capital by utilizing crop rotations with the use of cover crops. Real quick quote here: biological capacity or capital is biodiversity plus the long-term effects of having biodiversity. It is soil with high organic content that has excellent tilth and structure and holds a lot of its mineral content in organic form. It is diverse and healthy populations of plants and animals, both in and on the soil, made up of healthy individuals. Biological capital is what allows the ecological processes, water cycle, nutrient cycle, and energy flow to function properly. And it provides a system of natural checks and balances that limits the populations of pest organisms. It is wealth in the truest form and is vital not only to agriculture, but to society as a whole. When biodiversity is high throughout the entire soil plant animal complex, both productivity and stability will be high. Weeds, diseases, parasites, and pest organisms of all type will still be present, but not in the concentrations high enough to interfere with the functions of the local environment or those of the humans living in the environment. But that was a really neat quote from Walt Davis back in 2015. But again, it kind of ties in what we're talking about on biological capital. Getting into energy and resources, plant economy, again, energy comes from the sun, it's driving it, right? But that's where that economy is. Plant solar collector seeds, but also leaves are much cheaper than man-made solar panels. And hence also what we're talking about is, again, those other inputs, inorganic fertilizers that are coming into play, some more of the herbicides, pesticides, those kind of things that are all being brought in as inputs, utilizing good soil health and utilizing plants in that whole system are going to be a lot cheaper in the soil economy, and hence our pocketbooks as well too. Again, just kind of remember plant economy resource. Just keep thinking the carbon. How do the things that we're working on and putting into the soil, how are they affecting that carbon and that whole carbon cycle? And again, it's incredibly important. We keep talking about nitrogen and again, how the importance of nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium are for plants in general. But what we're showing here is that, as you guys well know this, that nitrogen makes up the majority of the Earth's atmosphere, 76.5%. So we're not wanting for nitrogen, right? I mean, it's there, it's in the system. It's just actually being able to get it into the soil and be able to have it utilized by plants. So how do we do that? And again, this is where we're kind of talking, about utilizing the soil biology and utilizing, plants and that whole system to utilize this. What we're showing here is, some rhizobia. Legumes are going to they have a good association with rhizobia bacteria, which will produce nitrogen. Okay, and so let's look at utilizing the biology to get that system going and maintain that system and keep it healthy. So, but again, that's what we're kind of talking about, energy and utilizing those resources. So I'll kind of end here on a quote from Dr. Christine Jones, who's basically, we're talking about free nitrogen factories. From an agricultural perspective, the most important of the free living nitrogen fixing bacteria are associative diazotrophs, so called because of the atmospheric nitrogen that they fix occurs as dinitrogen, and associative because, like a mycorrhizal fungi, which we'll talk a little bit more about here later on with Marlon's presentation, they require the presence of a living plant for their carbon. These bacteria live in close proximity to plant roots or are linked to plant roots via the mycorrhizal highway. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about the mycorrhiza here in a second. But again, utilizing the organisms that we have in place or could introduce to utilize and get that factory pumping for the nitrogen. And I'm going to end on this particular slide, but again, the plant economy, resources, number one is carbon, number two is nitrogen, right? But other mineral resources, are out there and are needed by the plants. And so how can we hire a lot of those tiny miners to go get them? And how can we use the biology to actually get that economy going and maintain that economy? So with that, I'll turn it over to Marlon.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Let's see if this goes over. Are you seeing the appropriate slide, Joe?
I am.
All right, so Joe talked a little bit about nitrogen production. So these little organisms are basically nitrogen factors. Some of the species of organisms are Aspergillus and Azobacter and also Rhizobium. We're mostly familiar with Rhizobium because that's the bacteria that infects the legumes. But all of these organisms must associate with a plant because they trade nitrogen to the plant for a food source, or we could just call it carbon. Now, one of the challenges with nitrogen factory production in a plant and soil ecosystem is it will not happen if excess nitrogen is already in the soil, because the plant is not going to ship carbon to an organism or trade if it doesn't get any return on its investment. So plant economy resources, number one is carbon, number two is nitrogen, but there are many other mineral resources out there. And so the plant has to hire lots of tiny miners to go get those resources for them. In an interesting paper from the Scientific America, the title says, mycorrhizal fungus run the largest mining operation in the world. And in the paper, it's kind of interesting. They take an electron microscope view of a clay particle, a feldspar clay particle. And in that, you can see some dark lines in that white clay particle. And that's the mycorrhizal fungus mining or boring into that clay particle, extracting various elements and shipping it to the plant. So it's kind of a cool relationship. And in a sense, these tiny miners have an inexhaustible supply of plant needed nutrients. They just got to go mine them and get them. Here's a couple pictures of the mycorrhizal fungus. I want to focus on the top right. We got a few, so it's the main picture is a root system, is a piece of a root. And we got little black dots there in the root, and that's inside the root. That's the arbuscular, or the little storage mechanism, storage organ for the mycorrhizal fungus. And then it's got the black hypha showing out there. The green picture is just another picture of mycorrhizal fungus, and the little spherical or round structures are the spores. So that's how, when the plant dies and quits feeding the mycorrhizal fungus, it hurries and makes some spores so that it has some mechanism to reproduce 6 months down the road. So it's kind of cool. This next picture on the left is a picture of a carrot root blown up with electron microscope. And I don't know how big this is. I mean, it's probably hundredths of an inch. But notice all the fine hairs or the strands. That's the mycorrhizal fungus. So individually, the mycorrhizal fungus isn't very powerful. But when you have a couple billion of them on a plant root or in your system, now you're making some headway. A quote here from the Scientific America publication says, mycorrhizal fungi mine the soil not only for the basic food nutrients for plants we are familiar with, like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, etc., but also those hard to come by trace elements, zinc, copper, manganese, etc., which plants need for strong immune system health and survival against a potentially hostile world of pathogens. Oddly enough, many soils are rich in important nutrients, but they are often locked up in a physical form, which make them unavailable to most plants. So nice little quote there from the journal article. Our next section is infrastructure. The definition is the basic equipment and structures such as road and bridges that are needed for a country. So Joe's talked quite a bit about transportation, communication, and economies will be severely crippled or limited when these are lacking or disrupted in times, for example, of war strategy. I love the little sitcom movie, Hogan's Heroes. I generally fall asleep at night watching that, and my good wife shuts the channel changer off. But Hogan's Heroes, in the little video TV series, they're always disrupting the infrastructure of the German war effort. They're blowing up bridges, they're blowing up train tracks, whatever they can do to inhibit the infrastructure of that country, to limit their economy, to limit the progress of the economy. Well, we can quickly look at the interstate infrastructure of the United States of America. We have a big infrastructure of major highways. I live here on Highway 25 going through Wyoming, so we're pretty close to a major highway that can go north and south or east and west. Now, so that's the highway system. How about the paved road, the second or tertiary type roads in America? Now, boy, look at the infrastructure, the capacity of that economy to function, because we have such a transportation infrastructure. Well, let's compare it to the plant root, to the root system. On the left is a little pine tree seedling, and it's got its branches with three main laterals. That's kind of the highway interstate system. But in all reality, there's lots of regions in that soil that are not impacted by that root system. On the picture on the right, it shows that same seedling that has mycorrhizal fungus associated with it. Now that looks like our secondary and tertiary paved roads in America. Look at the exploration of that soil ecosystem that now can happen. So pretty impressive how that plant grows its economy, and it grows its infrastructure to become more powerful. So mycorrhizal fungi transports. Another cool picture of a carrot root showed mycorrhizal fungus. Phosphorus is one of the hardest elements to access because it's tied up and it's not very plentiful. Other elements that mycorrhizal fungus can get is nitrogen, potassium, calcium, magnesium, iron, zinc. Now, zinc, boron, manganese, and copper and iron are considered micronutrients, and boy, they're in tough supply. And so, in dry times, the mycorrhizal fungus helps transport and supply water, and so that can be very important for us in the Intermountain West because we're generally in the middle of a drought, coming in a drought or coming out of a drought. So very important. A quote from one of our friendly soil ecologists, Dr. Christine Jones. She says mycorrhizal fungi can extend quite a distance from the plant roots. They form networks between plants and colonies and soil bacteria. Plants communicate with each other via messages sent through these networks. Mycorrhizal fungus are both the highway and the internet of the plant soil world. A soil system without mycorrhizal fungus is like a farming system without roads, rail lines, ports. It has huge potential, but is severely limited. Here's a picture of the author of this presentation. They went on a trip to Brazil and looked at some of their no-till farming systems. And this is just a picture off the internet, but it shows a huge amount of combines in one field together for a picture opportunity. And they can certainly get the field harvested quick. But in Brazil, Keith was telling us that their infrastructure is very limited. It may take 3.5 days to get a truck from the field to the port or from the field to a place to unload the truck. And so the problem is not growing a crop or getting the crop harvested. It's the lack of infrastructure, which is crippling their economy over there. Now, if and when they ever get their infrastructure developed, that'll put a lot of price pressure on soybeans from Brazil because they have the ability to produce it, but they lack the opportunity or the transportation infrastructure. So earthworms can help transport water, oxygen, surface carbon, and other microorganisms kind of are hitchhikers on them. So the earthworm is a great infrastructure creator and transportation mechanism in our soil ecosystem. Talking a little bit about communication, plants use liquid carbon from root exudates to communicate to the soil microorganisms what they need. So this is a book from Marshall, 1995, that says when a root spits out some amino acids to the different soil biology, like tryptophan or adenine, those amino acids that are expelled from the root trigger the microorganisms to bring it some growth regulators like cytokinins or indoacetic acids, or L-methionine will trigger the organism to produce some methane for the plant. Whatever that plant needs, it can send out chemical signatures, chemical forms of carbon to the different mycorrhizal. So for example, and I can't say this word very well, but luteolin, an extract from the root sent to the rhizobium molecule starts the formation of nodule development. So lots of different chemical exudates, all carbon-based, come from the plant to trigger microbial response. The rhizosphere, and we've talked about the rhizosphere in previous virtual workshops, but it's the zone of soil right around the root. And that is the area where communication and commerce is really occurring. It kind of reminds us of the New York Stock Exchange, right? Huge amounts of communication going on there. So just a more graphic example of the plant root pushing out carbon sources to, say, rhizobium bacteria. The rhizobium gets carbon source or sugars or whatever it needs. It sends the plant new nitrogen. We'll go down here to the bottom right. The plant feeds the particular microbe carbon source, whatever it needs. The plant, that microorganism may bring back water, copper, zinc, and different examples on the left-hand side also. So the economy is based on trading sugar. That's the currency that Joe talked about to ask the microbes to provide certain elements or water that the plant needs, because the plant can't move, right? And if it does move through new growth root system, it's very slow. So it's really got to rely on its partners in the economy. Communication and infrastructure. Plants can signal through the mycorrhizal network and allow plants to communicate threats through chemical signaling. So many of these chemicals that the root sends out is transferred from one plant to the other through the mycorrhizal highway. In this example, the plant on the left has aphids attacking it. There's some signaling that goes to the next plant. The next plant can produce chemicals or emit pheromones that attract predator insects and wasps. Disease, defense and protection. Joe gave a lot of good examples of that. The plant and soil economy needs to be protected from from water, either too much or too little, because that plant can't move and get into shelter of a home. It has to be protected from wind, heat, and cold. Compaction is often a issue that the plants need to be helped protected from. And of course, weeds and insects are other mechanisms of defense and protection that plants need to be protected from. I love this quote from Ralph Derpsch. The first line of defense in soil is produce an armor or a cover. Rolf says almost all advantages of the no-till system come from the permanent cover of the soil and only from a few from not tilling the soil. We should always aim at full cover. Oh, I want to go back one slide here. I'll go on. The second line of plant defense is plant signaling. Plants signal each other and signal insects and soil organisms to assist them in defense. In the Scientist magazine, it gives a pretty good little illustration of a plant being attacked, sending signals to the next plant saying, hey, you better be ready, it's coming. And so that plant can then start sending defense volatile chemicals to attract aphid hunting wasps, for example, to help repel that pest. And again, the soil ecologists now believe that communication is being transported through warning signals through the mycorrhizal fungus. So one thing that's interesting, some scientists put radioactive isotopes on the mother tree, and I don't remember this number, but 100 feet down below the mother pine tree, they could find that radioisotope in the little seedlings. And so those little seedlings were connected via mycorrhizal fungus through that, in a sense, family of pine trees. It was kind of intriguing to me. The third line of defense is symbiotic relationships between plants and organisms, such as endophytic fungus. So this is a fungus that grows right in some of our grass plants like tall fescue, but they're learning that almost all plants now have endophytes, or they have microorganisms that are growing inside the plants, and many of those are for defense and disease protection. The fourth line of defense is diversity of plants, root types, types of seasons, insects, and microorganisms. Most attacking organisms will only focus on one or two things. But this is kind of an interesting picture of showing a 10 or 15-way cover crop mix that really protects its habitat because of flat out diversity. It's a good picture of a 10-way cover crop mix in the seeds. So we've reviewed quickly the keys to a healthy soil, and surprisingly, these look very similar and are exactly the same as Joe's introduction of the economies of our nation: supply, demand, currency, capital, energy and resources, infrastructure, defense and protection. So just a quick review. The 10 takeaway points from this talk are: economies are intricately interconnected and independent. We need to have all three legs of the soil, plants, and animals working together to build a strong soil economy. When one of the legs are broken, for example, if the biology is neglected, or we're disturbing the soil too much, that wrecks the habitat for the microorganisms, our soil economy will be minimized or crippled. Principle 2, reduce the amount of welfare you are giving your economy. Get everyone working as much as possible. Again, if everybody's working, you build a strong economy. Number 3, increase your cash flow of carbon currency. Joe taught us that carbon is the currency of the soil ecosystem. An example rotation is that a corn soybean rotation is that it is less than 50% efficient in collecting solar energy and producing liquid carbon. So how do we improve that? We can learn to put cover crops. We can add new crops to our system. In a corn soybean system, many of our soil health innovators are learning to put wheat in the rotation so that it gives them more opportunity to produce cover crops, which will increase the cash flow or increase the carbon in our soil economy. We need to learn to make capital investments of long-term carbon, and that long-term capital is called organic matter. Once you get some capital, don't sell off the investment. Many people, and I'm sorry to say, but when I was a young man farming with my dad decades ago, this would have been the story of our farm. We were moldboard plow and we were using the disc. We didn't realize that we were having negative effects on our capital. On years when we had excess straw, all we could think about was baling it and getting it hauled off the field or selling it. We didn't realize that that was our long-term investments. So don't sell off those investments because they will build your soil economy. Solar energy is currently free. They haven't figured out how to tax us yet. So we should use every opportunity to have plants capture it and boost your economy. So how do you improve and capture more of it? One way is to plant cover crops. This is a cover crop grown behind the corn. Then the next year is a commodity crop like a soybean, and then a wheat, and then followed by a cover crop. So it really increases the percentage of solar capture or solar energy in your soil economy. And then a lot of guys are able to graze their cover crops for additional capital and income in their economy stream. Number 6, take advantage of free manufacturing and free mining resources. Look, we don't got to hire these mycorrhizal fungus or rhizobium. Generally, the most expensive thing we have to do is buy some rhizobium inoculant for the legume, and our little miner buddies will go together. The better we treat them, the more food we give them through photosynthate, the better the habitat the soil condition is in, meaning granular structure, the better off those little free miners will work for us. And remember, 1 or 2 doesn't seem to make a big difference, but 1 or 2 billion of these little free miners make all the difference in our soil ecosystem. Number 7, employ lots of tiny workers. We need miners, we need transporters, we need communicators, we need protectors. Basically, it comes down to we need to encourage as much as biological diversity in our soil ecosystem as possible. Principle 8, build and do not destroy the infrastructure. Takes lots of time to build mycorrhizal fungus. And think about this, even when they're channels, when they die because the plant, let's say winter wheat crop is done growing or the cover crop is done growing, those little micro channels are still there. Just like an earthworm channel, That earthworm's been building infrastructure, massive highways for transportation of water and nutrients and carbon flow throughout that soil ecosystem. So build and do not destroy infrastructure is the 8th principle. You'll really see your economy grow when you quit destroying that infrastructure. Number 8, protect your economy with soil armor. You know, I think of the princess who was looking for a knight, but she wasn't looking for a knight in rag cloth, and she was not looking for a knight in tinfoil. She was looking for a knight in what? A knight in shining armor. And so in order to protect your economy, the number one thing you can do is protect it with soil armor. And in this case, it's plant residue. The 10th principle is diversity. So very important for a healthy economy, for this plant, root, and soil interaction. Without diversity, the soil economy can never grow and flourish. So that's just a review of our 10 economy principles. And with that, we'll see if there's any questions from the audience.
Thank you both, Marlon and Joe, for that wonderful presentation. Yeah, we'll stick around here for a minute to see if there are any questions. It absolutely amazes me how intricate that system is. When you guys compare the mycorrhiza and all of that to the United States road system, I mean, that is such a great comparison at what's going on there.
Yeah, when I first heard this talk, I thought, wow, what a good analogy. The interstate, the paved roads with the mycorrhizal system. That just really pulled on my heartstrings, Angel, and kind of start helping me to compare the two systems, the soil system and the world economy or the national economy. So it's a fun talk, a fun talk to give.
Yeah, it was a fun talk to listen to. Thank you both.
Yeah, our pleasure.
All right.
Joe, just a comment. I thought it was interesting how our currency is so dynamic and fluid. You know, you got credit cards, you got cash, you got stocks and bonds, you got all forms of currency that we use. And it's interesting to me that the soil has the same way. We have liquid carbon, we have long-term carbon, we have, it's just amazing how the two similarities are very similar.
It's amazing, isn't it? No, I know. As I was going through this as well, I was just, lining everything up side by side, and it's just absolutely amazing how they do. They all match up in terms of, currency, like you were just talking about. It's huge, but then the infrastructure, like we were just talking about before, all these different parallels, but they all add up, and so it's just really amazing to see that.
Yeah, it's a great way to compare and really understand the system too. For folks who aren't familiar with the soil system, it's an easier way to kind of wrap your head around what exactly is going on down there and help us to cater our management methods to support that system.
Yeah, exactly. Very good, Angel.
So it doesn't really look like we have any questions. If anybody does end up having any questions for me or Marlon or Joe, I'll be sending out a follow-up email after the webinar that'll have all of our contact information. So feel free to reach out to us. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website. So that's ckcd.org. So again, thank you so much to Marlon and Joe for being here with us today. We really appreciate it. I will also there'll be a survey sent out after this as well. If you could please take the time to fill that out, we would greatly appreciate that. And I think we're good. So thank you both. And I hope that everybody enjoys the rest of their week.
Okay, thank you.
Take it easy, everybody.
Thanks. Bye, guys.